One, two, three.
The Local Youth Worker is a podcast brought to you by Reformed Youth Ministries. Since 1972, RYM has sought to reach and equip youth for Christ, and this podcast seeks to reach and equip those parents and youth workers who share that same desire. For more information on our student conferences, youth leader training, or resources, visit rym.org.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Local Youth Worker, a podcast brought to you by Reformed Youth Ministries. I'm your host, John Parrott. This is episode number 394. We'll get to my interview in just a little bit. If you've been tuning in over the last few weeks, we've changed things up a little bit in terms of how we structure the podcast. We've had a few episodes where we don't have multiple segments. We just have one primary segment. And that's going to be the case today on this episode. In just a little bit, I'm going to be talking to a father and son. For those who tuned in to episode number 391, Brian Montgomery joined us and shared the story of his son Walker and discussed the sextortion trend that led to Walker taking his own life. As strange as it is to say this about that episode, it was an encouraging episode. Although it was horrific to think about the evils of this world, it was redemptive. The Montgomery family loves Jesus. And so elements of the gospel were heard throughout that testimony. Well, this episode today is related to that. A year prior to the events that took place with the Montgomery family, I had a friend of mine reach out to me and say that this had occurred in his own family. And as this more recent episode occurred with the Montgomery family, I reached back out to my friend and asked if he and his son might be willing to come on and to discuss this. And they both were very willing. And so we hope today this will raise awareness for this trend that is taking place, but also be an encouragement. As I talked about our stories of grace that we have on this podcast periodically, we see that God takes brokenness and works beauty through it. And so I hope you'll hear that today through this interview. So for now, here's my discussion with Robert and Campbell. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, John, it's good to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, good to see you guys. Why don't you both just tell our listeners where you're joining us from? Campbell, we can start with you. And it's funny, you guys are actually together. I had that question written down because typically when I have two guests, they're in different places, but you guys are together. But go ahead, Campbell.
Yeah. So we've lived up on Signal Mountain in Chattanooga for a while. I'm currently at Covenant College on Lookout Mountain, so kind of jumping over another mountain. But
You're coming to the mountain.
Yeah,
Back to the mountain.
back to
Right.
All right. And Robert, yeah, be sure to tell us as well about See Jesus. I know our listeners might remember you. You've been on the podcast a handful of times, but tell us a little bit about where you are and then what you're doing with See Jesus.
Yeah, I've got 4 kids and 2 in college and two girls at home, both my boys. So I'm outnumbered now. I've got a wife, a female dog, and 2 daughters. And so,
Oh man.
I know. I've been on staff with See Jesus for about 4 years, just taking the person of Jesus into student ministries around the country. And yeah, it's a fun thing to be a part of.
Yeah, no, we appreciate your work and want to always point people to See Jesus and to check out all that they're doing. Robert and Campbell, I just want to thank you guys for your willingness to come on today and to talk about something that's very sensitive. But before we get into that, though, Campbell, why don't you just begin by telling us, where you grew up, where you went to school, some of the hobbies, extracurriculars that you're involved in during high school.
Yeah. So I was at public high school on Signal Mountain, have been since 6th grade. And I started track and field in 8th grade and continued doing that through senior year. And now I'm doing it in college, which is awesome. And I did 1 year of football my senior year. Just thought that I'd try it as my last year in high school, and it was awesome. Really enjoyed it.
He was really good. He went out his
It's
senior year and won a starting position as a wide receiver, scored a couple touchdowns, and it was a lot
wow.
of fun. He's like, man, I wish I'd have done this earlier.
Yeah, it's fun to just be able to say, yeah, I think I might try football my senior year, and then
Yeah.
that works out. So wait, Robert, does he get athleticism from you?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
I played baseball, and yeah, he was like me though. He didn't like getting hit in football, so that's why I didn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody really does. Some people just say that, but it's, deep down, I don't know. Well, Campbell, tell us a little bit about youth group. I know as we kind of were talking pre-recording, your dad, Robert, was transitioning into a new ministry. So some of that, y'all were moving churches and everything, but just talk a little bit about your youth group experience.
Yeah. So I feel like I was in when we were at First Pres, our first church when we moved to Chattanooga. I was in a pretty good youth group. I developed 3 really good relationships, and I'm still in those relationships right now. They're still awesome friends, and we kind of all went into the like high school youth group and middle school youth group together, and had 2 really awesome youth leaders and interns. And my older brother was part of the youth group. So it was a really good community, and I felt welcomed, and all of those relationships were kind of ones that carried on to when we moved churches and were bouncing around. And that was pretty hard, but
Mhm.
I didn't find it super difficult. But yeah, I think that youth group in the past was very beneficial. Went on mission trips, and I just really enjoyed it.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I know, as I said at the outset of this interview, we're going to be talking about some sensitive subject matter. And I know, being in student ministry, I've been around 20 years or so. Pornography is a consistent issue youth workers are dealing with. As we've talked about on this podcast, this is both a female issue as well as a male issue. But we've definitely seen just the prevalence of that struggle take place with smartphones and social media. And Robert, I know this is something just as fathers we talk about with our children. Why don't you maybe, Robert, just kind of lead us into some of your conversations about this struggle?
Yeah, John, you and I, as friends, you and I've talked about this quite a bit, and I think it is one of the great evils of our day that's kind of getting a free pass. And so I felt, I've been in youth ministry, your kids are talking about this all the time in your small groups and confessing that stuff. And so I knew that when my boys got to that age, middle school, high school age, that I had to have pretty transparent conversations with them. So it was a consistent conversation. Campbell, I don't know if you remember. I would just, it was probably really uncomfortable for my boys because I didn't really preempt it or anything. I'd just walk into the room and go, all right, so let's tell me how the struggle's going with pornography. And so it was a pretty consistent weekly, bi-weekly conversation, just checking in with them to just so they would know it's common, and also not to make it this just to leave it in the dark. all the time, but just to have it as an open conversation. Even though I probably embarrassed the heck out of them every time I asked about it.
Yeah, that's why I laugh, because dads are just great at creating awkward moments for kids, and but I'm convinced Satan loves to use that as a tactic to keep us from talking about things and talking about sensitive matters, and it is
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
for us to talk about these things.
Yeah, for sure. Campbell, what was your, like, how that impacted you? Not my conversations with you, but just seeing friends struggle with it and those kind of things. How you were dealing with it individually.
Yeah, I think I know all of my friends struggled with it, and we would talk about it sometimes. So it felt relieving to know that other people, especially ones close to me, were also dealing with it. And so it didn't feel like embarrassing or like super awkward to talk about with them because they're coming from the same background. But I also think your conversations helped, even though they were awkward and but they help kind of keep me accountable, just to have that in the back of my head that you're thinking about me, making sure that I'm doing okay with it. Yeah.
It helped you kind of stay in the fight,
Mm-hmm.
is what you're getting at.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is, as we were talking about just a little while ago, shining a light on these things is important. Even though it feels like the last thing you want to do, it's vital in this discussion. And as I'm saying that, I'm even reminded a few weeks ago we had two documentary filmmakers on talking about Into the Light, a documentary on dealing with pornography. And so just want to point people back to that episode, but also to that resource. I think it's a 6-part documentary talking about the struggle. Well, Campbell, why don't you tell our listeners what happened to you on the night of January 21st and how it's related to all of this discussion?
Yeah. So it wasn't actually super late that night. Obviously my dad was gone.
Yeah, I was out of town
Mhm.
at the time.
My
Yeah.
mom was downstairs. I was just in my room, probably watching YouTube or something. And then I remember getting an Instagram message. And normally I would kind of be hesitant with that because it's like, oh, this is a scam. But it all seemed really like normal. Like there was just this girl reaching out to me, like saying hi. So we started texting like a normal conversation. I was watching for like weird like spelling and kind of phrases
Mm-hmm.
that didn't match, but it was all very kind of set. So it ended up advancing more, and I remember just being in this state of like I felt like I was taken over by sin, and I just didn't think. I wasn't thinking. I was just doing. Um, the common sense in my head kind of left, and so I fell into that temptation, and I felt scared and like all of the emotions afterwards because I knew it wasn't right. Um, so then after that, they resent the pictures to me, and I was like very confused. And then they sent what seemed like a copy and paste message, because it was super quick, like explaining what I needed to do to kind of get out of this pickle. They're like, send me $1,000, um, and I won't send these pictures anywhere. Um, and they were, and then I didn't respond, and I remember just sitting there and thinking, like, this cannot be happening. This isn't real.
So Campbell, when they sent you were texting with this supposed girl.
Yes. Yeah.
And then responded. And then kind of out of nowhere, there was this kind of shift in the conversation
Mm-hmm.
in a sense. And then at what point did you realize it was like, I've just totally I've fallen into evil, and I've fallen into the hands of an evil person who's doing something. When did you realize it was a scam?
I think so when we exchanged pictures, and then it was super advanced, it's just mind blowing how they can get around this. But on Instagram, you can send a picture, and you open it, and it's like a one-time open thing, and it tells you if like a person takes a screenshot or saves it. So I remember like they asked to test it out, just to prove that they weren't gonna do anything. So when we did that, and they took a picture from a different phone of the phone they were messaging me on, and then they sent that picture to me, and that's when I realized, right when I got the picture back.
Hmm.
And that's, yeah, I kind of was just flooded with adrenaline and just didn't know what to do. So my first thought was to just continue the conversation to try to get them to change their mind about what they were trying to scam me. So yeah, that was the first point of realization.
I'm curious how they responded. I don't know that I've heard that part of this.
Yeah. Yeah, you had a question.
Well, and how long did that go on, as you're trying to talk them out of this? Just
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was probably 20, 30 minutes of just back and forth. And they would respond with the exact same thing every time. Like, you have to send me this money, or I'm going to send it to like everyone you know. And I think what really started to scare me is when they went into my Instagram account and started screenshotting people I follow. And he was saying like, I'm going to send it to all of these people if you don't send me the money. So that it's hard to remember just because I was in such a blob, of panic and stress, and I had no idea what to do. And they kept saying like, you cannot, if you block me or delete this message, like they're going to get sent out everywhere. So you have to send this money. So I think, yeah, after that, I was like, okay, I'll send you whatever I have. So then we exchanged like payment info. I think it was PayPal. And then I sent them, I think it was $200.
Yeah. I was thankful as a high schooler,
Yeah.
you didn't have a wad of cash in your PayPal account at the
Yeah.
time.
So I sent them that amount, and he was like, I need 800 more. Or this is gonna get sent. So he started sending me screenshots of him sending the picture to people I knew, like in the direct message. So then I was like, okay, I have to start telling people. So I went and put on my story that my Instagram account got hacked. And if you receive any message, just delete it and not worry about it. So I did that and texted the people that were in the screenshot that he supposedly sent the picture to. And I was just saying like, hey, let me know if you get something that looks suspicious. So I did that. And then I think at that point, I went out of my room to the top of my steps and asked my mom to come upstairs. And then I was just very panicked. I remember shaking. I was cold, just very, very uncomfortable, and just an unimaginable amount of anxiety. So I remember her coming upstairs and immediately knowing something was wrong because of the tone of my voice. So I just told her what happened, just the main part of it, and then
Campbell, can I just pause right there?
okay.
Like the amount of courage it took for you to go to your mom with that is just amazing. I mean, that is the work of God's Spirit and God's grace. It's just stunning. I mean, you're a courageous young man.
I think that was
Yeah.
Yeah.
And echo that. I mean, just not only that, but here we are now talking about this here. I want to echo that courage. And yeah, so I mean, you call your mom up, she comes up, she can tell, like you said, from the tone of your voice, everything, that you're serious. How does she react, and just kind of talk us through some of that?
I remember she was confused because I couldn't get my words out. I was trying to explain what happened, and I was freaking out, obviously. But she was very calm, which was very helpful. She was extremely calm. I think she talked through it a little bit, just saying that it was going to be okay. Like, she was still confused. She didn't know what was happening, obviously. And then I think she called.
I think you called your brother, right?
Oh yeah, okay. I call my brother, and I just told him, and we talked through it. And at that point, I stopped communicating with the person. I think I blocked them, deleted the message, took like a few screenshots of the message and all of that stuff, just in case I needed to use it for something. But yeah, I think that was a really good idea, just to get rid of it, because I couldn't do anything in that moment.
So did they send it to everybody else like they said they were going to do?
I think they sent it to a few people, because I got a message from one girl who was at my school, who texted me, and this was just really amazing. She texted me and said that she got the message because I had reached out to her, because she was one of the people I saw that he sent it to. And she said she did get it, but she immediately deleted it and just didn't want anything to do with it. And she like apologized that it happened. So that was very, very nice. And I didn't know what to think about that, because normally high schoolers aren't that caring for other.
Now, that is awesome that she did that. Robert, you were saying you weren't home. How did you hear about all this? And then just kind of talk us through kind of your reaction.
Yeah. And John, I think that, this was January 21st of 2022. And we had never heard of this stuff. The term sextortion hadn't even been coined yet. So this is a year and a half ago, I guess, or more. And so, yeah, I think I was, I was at a conference with Paul Miller in Atlanta, and it was, I think by the time you guys called me, it was really, I was kind of like, okay, you've made a big mistake. Like, I didn't really get the gravity of it at the moment because I didn't really know understand, like, just being an old guy, just didn't understand all the implications of what were going on. And then I can remember just talking through it a little bit with Campbell. It seemed like you had your mom handled it super well. Your brother was incredibly calming and encouraging. And so I kind of felt at peace about it. And Paul and I spent some time in prayer in the hotel room. By this time it was about 11 o'clock. And the next morning we kind of finished the conference. I came home, and I can remember I had to drop a rental car off, and Campbell and I had been texting throughout the morning. And then, man, I just remember kind of starting to realize the weight of it as time passed a little bit, and pulling into the rental place, dropping the car off. And I don't know if you remember this, but just remember sitting in the parking lot of Enterprise. And I got in the car, and just it just tears just started streaming down his face. Just a lot of, at that moment, I was like, okay, wow, this is super heavy. And just not really. So man, it was just a moment where the Spirit was really, gave words that I don't know where they came from for me to talk through it with Campbell, and just a lot of listening and crying together and praying together. And then I think it was probably, we spent that whole day together, just being together. And then I think I remember at some point it hitting me, maybe a few days later, when I was able to just go to Campbell and saying, man, what a grace of God that this has happened early in your life, and the way you've responded, and the realities of, I couldn't imagine this happening when you're, in your 20s or 30s, and you're married and you have children, and someone tempts you to fall into that, and like the destructive nature of all that. And like here in our home, we can, the consequences of your actions, the older you get, are much bigger. So it was just, it was just a lot. It was a lot of hard season. Campbell's just had a lot of trials in his life anyway. And so this was just another part. And then last night we were talking, I was like, man, I just can't believe you're doing this. He was like, Dad, this is part of my story.
I met you down at the rental place, right? And I think I remember waking up the next morning,
before
that, and just feeling really like, I woke up and I was like, I really hope that was just a really bad dream. So I kind of walked around the house and came and sat in our living room and just stared outside. And I just remember feeling the presence of the evil one, and just the realization that it had happened the night before was just really heavy. And I remember just feeling the weight of, like, and I was replaying all of the things that could go wrong, like when I go back to school and what people found out, and just thinking about all of those things. And that's probably the heaviest I felt Satan, like in me, like ever in my life. So I think going down to the rental place, getting out of the house, and then just letting it out on you, and talking about it was very, very helpful.
How in the world did you go to school Monday morning. I remember worship being really, really beautiful. I think we were both in tears, and all of us, and your mom included, were in tears in worship that day, that Sunday. But how in the world did you function in the ability to go to school that next day?
Yeah, I don't really know. I think our conversation about it was helpful in that I just had to push through it. And it's something that happened in my life that I can't bottle up and never go back to school. So I think that was very difficult, just walking into the school and feeling like everyone was looking at me and kind of was overthinking that everyone knew, even though not everyone did. And I think you talked to me about that. So yeah, just walking around school was just another, it just felt like I was on the center stage with 2,000 people looking at me just all day.
Can you share about your friendships, those guys that kind of rallied around you?
Yeah. I think I didn't tell them until later on, when I got more comfortable with talking about it. And I remember we were at one of their houses, and
This is later on, as in just a few days, though. I don't remember it was too long.
The next weekend.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was three other guys that were close friends, and I just wanted to tell them and ask them if they knew about it, and none of them did, which was relieving. So then I could just tell them what happened, and they were just surprised that that is something that can happen. And they were apologizing that it happened and said that they would be there to back me up if anything were to go wrong. And I told them to look out for it if it surfaces at the school, just to kind of be like, hey, let's not talk about that. We don't want to start spreading stuff. So yeah, they were helpful just to kind of vent to and spill it out.
Some awesome friends. Yeah, not only for you to have a loving family that's walking you through this, but then to have a community of friends like that. I know that had to be, in some sense, I mean, you're able to offload some of that burden to others and know that others are carrying that with you. It's so interesting as we're talking about this. I mean, Robert, you were saying, yeah, this was a year and a half ago almost. We did not know that this would be a trend that it is now. Again, we had Brian Montgomery on a few weeks ago talking about this and their story, his son Walker. And since that aired, I've heard from a handful of youth workers who said, this thing has happened in my youth group. I have a student dealing with this. And so that's, I'm just thinking, Campbell, as you shared this with your friends to kind of raise awareness, that's part of why we're talking about this, is to raise awareness, but to bring hope to people as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, amen. John, I think it just hit me when Campbell was sharing that about his friends, how like this incident, like when kids go through this kind of stuff, evil likes to isolate it, and keep it in the dark. And what just hit me was that we live in an age where there's, I would say without exception, every boy that's alive has been exposed to pornography in some form or fashion. And what just hit me was that Campbell's friends were not surprised that Campbell had fallen into that temptation, but they were surprised that somebody could use it in the way that those guys did against him. And so I guess what's hitting me now is like, man, don't, like, if you fall into this, you should talk to somebody about it, because everybody can relate. Everybody knows. It's not like somebody's going to go, oh, I can't believe you actually fell into that temptation. You're so bad. Like, but that's what evil wants to do. So anyway, the reaction of his friends, I think, even brought comfort in the moment of going, yeah, they didn't condemn him. They weren't shocked. This is the reality of the world we live in. They were shocked by that someone would do this, but they were behind him because they get the struggle. They understand it.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important point you're bringing up, and that's kind of where I was leading us. I mean, even as we're talking about this, that it's our hope that this discussion does offer hope to others. And Robert, as you shared pre-recording, I mean, this could very well save someone's life, because we know, as a few episodes ago, talking to Brian, and sadly this led to his son Walker taking his own life, that we know, because this is a growing trend, there are others out there that are dealing with this. And for them to know they're not alone, for them to know that they have friends that love them, family members that love them, that's part of why we're having this conversation today, and pray that the Lord would use it in that way.
Yeah, and the fact that, goodness, I listened to that episode and saw his interview, and I don't know that I could handle it the way Walker's dad is handling it, and the beauty of, I hope that he's comforted by the beauty of that his son's story is impacting a lot of people. Goodness,
Yeah,
they're really sorry for his loss.
No, he is. I've been able to correspond with him, and yeah, I mean, just there's encouragement and hope that Walker's life is continuing to impact others. Campbell, just getting back to your story a little bit more as well. Why don't you maybe share a little bit about the days, the weeks, the months after kind of going back to school, trying to kind of get back into normalcy of life, and then also know there's kind of a second part to this story as well that you can share.
I want to say it took a month just to kind of feel normal, going to school, and I was in the middle of my season for track, and I think that helped a lot, just because it would keep me occupied on something other than thinking about all of it. And I kind of pushed myself harder at practice and in the meets, and I developed stronger relationships with those friends that I told, and we got closer, and I felt way more comfortable, which was just amazing, and I didn't expect to recover that quickly. But I think I saw just a new view of everything afterwards, just the way media is used, social media and pornography, and it just opened my eyes that this is really just not something that we should, yeah, it's just something that we should look more carefully at. And it was kind of, beforehand, I just saw it as a problem that every guy struggled with, and not as like a world issue. Opened my view of a lot of things, which is just amazing. And I was more careful with what I was seeing, and how I viewed people, and so I feel like I was more at peace afterwards, after experiencing that.
Well, and even talk a little bit too. I mean, just as you're saying that, what did your relationship with social media become, and your smartphone? I mean, how did this kind of shape some of that?
Yeah. So I deleted Instagram after that happened for a while, and then I was just thinking um about how I can continue to fight the battle because it's always going to be there. Um, and so after a little while, I got Instagram back and just started using it normally and felt comfortable with myself using it because I kind of set up a mental boundary that like that's never happening again. And it cannot happen again. Um, so I wasn't scared that I would fall into temptation. Um, and I was really certain that I couldn't just because of how traumatic the experience was. So I think allowing myself to kind of get back into social media was a good idea because it created like a mental like it built my mental structure up so that I could continue to fight like pornography and um, temptations and lust. Um, so I think I handled that um, well, and yeah, that was yeah.
Is Instagram your only form of social media?
Um, I mean, I have Snapchat and TikTok, but those aren't
Okay.
really, I don't use them other than communication and
So how would you encourage maybe a middle schooler or high schooler who hasn't gone through that um, to utilize social media in a safer way? What would you say to them if they were to ask you that question?
um, I would say to be super open about it with their parents. Just say like, "Hey, I'm using Instagram or Snapchat. Um, like you can have access to it." Yeah, so I think getting it in someone else's head, so it's on their mind, because I feel like I definitely hid that stuff, social media, not as just like as a whole, but the stuff, the certain things inside of the social media that cause temptation. I just kind of hid from everywhere because I was insecure about it, and so I think opening it up before it even begins is, and for the parents just to be on top of controlling that, I think is very, very important.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. Campbell, as I said a minute ago, there's kind of a second part to this story too. Why don't you share with our listeners what happened? I don't know exactly timeline, maybe a few months after, or was it a year later, something along those lines?
Yeah, it was a few months after. I remember kind of I got back to full speed with my mental health afterwards, and we had this track meet in Alabama. Um, that was a lot of fun. I got first in both of my races. My best friend got second. Um, and so it was just an awesome kind of team bonding time with everyone. Um, and then that Monday or Tuesday at school, I was sitting in my very first class, kind of feeling relaxed, not pressured, still kind of in the back of my head thinking about it. Um, but I remember sitting in class and one of my friends texted me and said, "Hey, so and so has the picture and he's sending it to people." Um, and so I just freaked out and was like, "What are you talking about? Um, like, is this real? Like, are you just messing with me?" Or so I went out of the class and called my mom. She was at home and she was confused. She was like, how is it resurfacing after a few months? So I was like, you have to get me out of class, out of school. Because he had told, my friend had texted me who had resurfaced the picture. So I knew who it was, and that person was in my next class. So I remember I remember talking to you when we got home.
Yeah.
She took me out of school, and I was just like, I don't think I could have gone to the next class without punching him in the face.
I was going to ask, are you bigger than this guy?
I think, yeah,
Definitely
so.
stronger. Yeah, Campbell's pretty fit dude. And John, I was out of town again, visiting my brother, who had been, dealing with cancer. So there was a lot of stuff going on in our life, and I was visiting with him, and Campbell, I literally, this was a dad's reaction when Campbell called me and told me this. I literally said, Campbell, you have my permission tomorrow morning to show up at school, to find this kid in the parking lot and beat the living beep out of him. And I literally said that to Campbell. I was like, pound his head. So I'm like, I'm just livid. I just remember how in my truck driving back, thinking, how in the world did this happen again? And so I called a friend. I was like, my friend Brian that I work with, and I said, Brian, this is what I've told my son. I know it's probably not right. Please talk me off the cliff here. Like, I'm going to go to the school and find the kid and beat the crap out of him. So yeah, Brian was great. Helpful, tight. So I called Campbell back. I was like, okay, don't go to school tomorrow and beat the snot out of him. Let's talk about it. I'll be home in a couple hours. So yeah. But man, it was just so like, at that point, Rebecca and I realized, before it had happened, the first incident had happened had happened on the weekend at home. It wasn't a school issue necessarily. So we didn't deal with the school system in that. But this time it became a school issue. And so we went to the principal and kind of called a meeting and the principal was great. And Campbell asked if both his track coach and his football coach could be in on the meeting. And both those coaches were just phenomenal for Campbell during that time. And so the school, I think they dealt with it in some ways. I think the kid got wind that you knew and didn't show up to school for, I think, probably a week.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
And man, John, this is like what, a month before, or maybe even like 3 weeks before Campbell's senior graduation. So it's just like so hard to be dealing with this when it's supposed to be a time of just wonderful celebration of everything. And yeah, so that was just a difficult period. So I think part of that, part of it's just a really hard lesson learned. Like, the stuff you put online doesn't disappear, and it can resurface, and the hardship of dealing with that again. And I couldn't, imagine dealing with that a second time. If you hadn't talked about it the first time, you were still holding all that in. You may have shown up with school more than just an angry fist to pound the kid,
So how many people did this guy end up sharing this picture with? And were you just, again, reliving all those thoughts and emotions of everyone's looking at me at school again?
So that, the track meet that I was at, apparently he had done that night, like Saturday night. So it wasn't during school, which was a better case. but I think he got it from someone who originally got the picture from the first incident. So there was more people who it kind of surfaced to than I had thought, which scared me because I didn't think that many people, that they didn't send it to that many people. So, and everyone, I think he sent it to like a group chat or something, and everyone was pretty upset at him because they were all mad that like that's not something you do. And so yeah, it just was really hard. It was just like a punch in the gut all in the span of 30 seconds. Just all of those emotions came back, and I started almost like PTSD or something from the first instance. It just felt the exact same. And I was in school, and I was like, I cannot, like, there's people around me. So I went home and we talked about that, and that was very helpful.
So now, I mean, fast forwarding to today, yeah, how are you dealing with this? I mean, your family? I'd love to just hear kind of how you're processing it now.
um yeah, like we talked last night just about how part of my mistake is like having this talk and kind of sending a message out to everyone else, because after experiencing it, I do not want anyone else to have to deal with it, because it's horrible. And so I think now it is hard to talk about, but not as hard, just because I know it can help people. And it's part of my past that, and I was just being a teenager. Everyone makes dumb decisions, and mine happened to be a little more serious, but um, yeah. So I think I've been doing good with it, and just kind of have it as part of my story in my life, and I'm not afraid to tell it to people, especially if it's beneficial or like helps them understand who I am. And so it's not a huge problem now. I just want to voice it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, you just said you might have made some more serious mistakes. I can guarantee you, Robert and I both made some dumb mistakes as teenagers. We just did not have phones that could record it, and so, but we
Dude,
were
yeah.
blessed to not have that. So just know everyone listening to this who's lived through the teenage years is nodding, saying, "Yep, we were all stupid, and we're still struggling in in many ways." So you're not alone in that. But Robert, just maybe talk about family as a whole, kind of after this and today, how you guys are processing this.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously, we had open conversations about that, but I think for me and my girls um and the boys, just having conversations about, honestly, John, we had a lot of conversations about just spiritual attacks, and it's something we don't talk about in our circles, but Satan is evil, and he really is seeking to devour, and he's really coming after families who follow Jesus. And I am not overstating this, I don't think. But the church, our government, every aspect of our culture is ignoring the realities of the destructive nature that pornography is dehumanizing our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's getting a free pass. I mean, it just blows me away. So I was like,
I'm going to interject. Would you explain what you mean by it's getting a free pass? You said that twice. I think I know what you mean, but I'd love for you to unpack that. Okay.
yeah. I think the church is being reactive in the sense of like, we're trying to figure out how do we deal with people and counsel them through the struggle of pornography. Well, why in the heck aren't we going after the pornography industry? Like, I don't know a lot. There are organizations doing that, but why are we not fighting evil and going after it? Right? We have the armor of God. Let's walk into battle. And my prayer has been that we could somehow totally destroy the pornography industry. And I know that's a high and lofty dream. They make more money than the NFL, Major League Baseball, and basketball combined in a year. So you're talking about billions and billions of an economic engine here, but it's destroying our culture. I guess I say it's got a free pass because we talk about what's going on with the next generation, what's happening with this and that. Like, why is our culture falling apart? And everybody comes up with all these answers, but nobody ever mentions pornography. It just gets a free pass, and it's destroying an entire generation, if not two or three, and it just continues to be ignored. We're trying to treat the symptoms and not going after the heart of it. And the majority of the reason is, John, this may be really blunt, but I think it's because 99% of men either are currently struggling with it and utilizing it, or they have in their past and they don't want to bring it up again. And so it's like this shame, like the Satan is just keeping it it's still rearing its head everywhere and keeping it in the dark because we're not talking about it. I mean, I've had conversations with pastors who say, well, I don't want to bring that word up in the congregation because there's little children listening. And I'm like, okay, I disagree with that. But I understand that to a point, but I disagree. I just think it is the massive cultural issue of our day, and we just continue to ignore it.
Amen. I'm glad you're sounding the alarm, and I agree that kind of the free pass aspect of it. But I think there is another aspect of sometimes we do talk about it a lot in various circles, and it just becomes kind of this background noise that we're not really even thinking about the devastating nature of it. And I know, just speaking from experience to youth and to families in youth ministry, I would get tired of talking about it, and I would get weary, and I would just think, you know what, everyone's kind of aware of this, everyone knows it's out there, and I just also think that's a tactic of the evil one. He just wears us down in this discussion. So I'm so glad, one, you're highlighting the spiritual aspect of this. I mean, just the demonic warfare that's going on, but then also what a massive issue this is for future generations. It's destroying children. It's destroying future marriages. I mean, again, since that interview aired with Brian Montgomery, I had another father who reached out to me, and this was someone I hadn't heard from in 20 years. And one of his friends, I think daughters, had been trafficked. And just talking about just obviously the devastating impact that's had on their family. And I mean, that's common, and that's an aspect of this discussion. I mean, just such a wicked evil that's related to the porn industry, and it's just continuing to take place. So I know we're talking about very sobering aspects of this conversation, but I know we're also going to start bringing this to a close. Maybe just end on, why did the two of you agree to come on this podcast? Again, I was reluctant to reach out just because this is so sensitive, and then shocked that both of you wanted this opportunity. And we've kind of, hit at some of this, or hinted at some of this, and stated some of it. But maybe just let's end kind of talking about that a little bit. Campbell, Robert, whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I think when the episode aired with Brian Montgomery, it was just like it just kind of, it hit me, and then you and I've talked about it a lot, and then I think just the realities of what devastating consequence that had in their family's life. And some people, lots of people that are going to be touched by that. And I thought, when you invite us to do this, I thought, man, this could be, there are stories everywhere in between that as well. The horror of what happened to their family, and then there's families whose kids are struggling with this who haven't told anyone, and they're just remaining in the dark. And then the story of what happened with Campbell and his willingness to not keep it in the dark. So I think, we're hitting there's kids on every spectrum, and a myriad of reasons of why it's just, it's really hard. I don't understand why the Lord laid it on Campbell's heart to come forth with that, because very, very well could have ended up where Walker ended up in all this. So that saddens me for their family. There's no reason beyond God's mysterious sovereign hand in all this. It has nothing to do with parenting or skills or any of that. I think it's just God continues to raise up people that are willing to tell their stories, and ours happens to be this one. And I hope it's an encouraging story for people to fight evil and to crush evil. All right.
Yes. Amen.
Go after it. Be tenacious. Don't give up.
Yep. For sure. Campbell, any thoughts you want to add to any of that?
Yeah. I think when he reached out to me and asked if I wanted to do this podcast, I was just kind of thinking about, I kind of remembered the very first thought when it happened, when I was just overwhelmed with everything. And my first thought was, I need to get help. I can't, this has escalated so much to where I can't just hide it. And I think I'm just really glad that God went into my heart and said, you cannot put this on yourself. You need to go get it out there, because it could have turned into something worse. And I don't remember having any of those kind of thoughts when it happened, just because I think God was protecting me with those thoughts of hurting myself or that kind of thing. And I'm just very grateful that he was with me in that, and he let me fight it. He didn't step in and completely get rid of it.
That's cool.
So yeah, I think my stories, just God's grace in my life with that, can help a lot of people and help their relationship with God and their parents, and just knowing that God's always in control, whether it seemed like it or not. Just always remember that he's there. Yeah, because I think another big thing was just having that thought in my head that, God, why are you letting this happen to me? You could have stopped it. Why did this massive temptation come into my heart? And so I would get mad mad at him and just be confused. And I think I realized that this was a huge turning point in my life. That just helped with a lot of different things. So I want people to not make that same mistake of getting angry with God, but just letting him do his thing. And it works out in the end. And I have a strong relationship with him. And there's always something good that comes from a fall in your life. So
Mm-hmm.
Dang, Campbell,
Yeah.
that's, I don't have Twitter, but that's a tweetable, a Twitter or whatever. There's always
Tweets,
something
yes.
good that comes from the fall in your life. That's awesome.
Man. Yeah, I mean, we've been using the language of story, throughout this interview, and we know as Christians, story resonates with us. We're created for stories. God told us a story to reveal Jesus to us, and so often when I think about your story, Campbell, and I think about Walker Montgomery's story, so often we can just hear the negative and the broken aspect of that story, but there's a fuller story to tell. And I'm so glad that you both came on to kind of recapture that narrative and to be able to say, as we've said, evil doesn't win. Satan is a defeated foe, and we can remind people of that even in the midst of something horrific, dark like this. That there's another story, and we can point others to that. And you, Campbell, have showed courage that, I mean, as a 19-year-old, I'm blown away that you'd want to come on, that you'd want to talk about this. You've ministered to me today as we're recording this. I know the Lord will use us to minister to others. Whether that's a student out there who hears this, or a youth worker, or a parent. So I cannot thank you both enough for taking the time, coming on, and sharing your story with us today.
Thanks, John.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Oh, come and buy without money. Oh, come and feast without pay. For the King has opened his banquet hall to the beggar, the outcast, and the slave.